They laughed when he paid $500 for a worthless mining claim on the edge of a dead town, calling the single father desperate and delusional. But when Marcus Webb discovered what lay hidden in that forgotten shaft, $250 million in untouched rare earth minerals, their laughter died in their throats, and the man they mocked became the one who would change everything. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The desert wind carried dust through the cracked window of the 1870 miner's cottage where Marcus Webb sat hunched over a kitchen table that wobbled with every movement. The wood was scarred from decades of use, sticky in places where his 7-year-old daughter Riley had spilled juice that morning, and he hadn't had time to clean it properly. Across from him, his 10-year-old son, Carter, worked on homework with the kind of fierce concentration that broke Marcus's heart because he knew the boy was trying to prove he could handle anything life threw at them, trying to be the man of the house even though he was still just a kid. Marcus was 34 years old but felt twice that when he looked in the mirror. His hands were calloused and scarred from 12-hour shifts at Patterson's Auto Repair, the only shop in Copper Ridge, Arizona that still bothered staying open after the mines closed. Every finger had a story. The scar on his left thumb from when a wrench slipped last winter, the burn mark on his right palm from grabbing a hot exhaust pipe without thinking, the permanent grease under his nails that no amount of scrubbing ever fully removed. These were working man's hands, the kind that fixed things for other people while his own life stayed broken. The town had died slowly after the last copper mine closed in 2003, bleeding population year by year like a wound that wouldn't heal. First, the young people left, chasing jobs in Phoenix or Tucson or anywhere that promised a future. Then the families followed, loading up moving trucks and disappearing down the highway. Then the businesses started closing, the movie theater, the department store, 3 of the 4 gas stations, the hospital. What remained was a skeleton of what Copper Ridge had once been, a proud mining community now reduced to stubborn old-timers and people too broke or too broken to leave. Marcus fell squarely into the second category. His wife, Angela, had left 2 years ago on a Tuesday morning in March. No dramatic fight, no screaming match, no affair that he knew of. Just a note on this same kitchen table, her handwriting shaky like her hand had trembled as she wrote it. "I can't do this anymore," it had said. "I can't watch our dreams shrink with every bill we can't pay, every opportunity that passes us by, every year that promises nothing but more of the same. I love the kids. I love you. But I can't breathe here. I'm sorry." She'd driven her old Honda Civic to Phoenix and never looked back. The divorce papers came 6 months later. Marcus had signed them without a lawyer because he couldn't afford one and because, deep down, he understood. Some people were built to endure. Others needed hope to survive, and Copper Ridge had run out of hope years ago. Marcus didn't blame Angela for leaving. Some days he barely blamed himself for staying. But Carter and Riley needed stability more than they needed a mother who resented them for existing, who looked at them and saw chains instead of children. So Marcus stayed. He worked. He scraped. He survived. The cottage they rented from Mrs. Castellano, a widow who owned half the remaining properties in town, cost $450 a month. That was cheap because the place had no air conditioning, and the Arizona summers turned it into an oven because the plumbing groaned and shuddered like it was dying every time someone flushed the toilet, because the windows were single pane and let in every bit of winter cold, because the roof leaked in 3 places when it rained. But it was theirs, or at least it felt like theirs. Riley slept in the only bedroom, her walls covered with drawings she'd made at school, colorful pictures of families and houses and dogs they couldn't afford to own. Carter had claimed the converted sun porch, a narrow space with windows on 3 sides that froze in winter and baked in summer, but he'd made it his own with posters of basketball players and a bookshelf Marcus had built from scrap lumber. Marcus took the couch in the living room, a sagging thing with springs that poked through the cushions if you sat in the wrong spot. He'd wake up most mornings with his back aching and his neck stiff, but he never complained. His discomfort meant his kids had real beds. It wasn't much, but it was something. On this particular Thursday evening in late September, as the sun painted the desert sky in shades of orange and purple, Marcus watched his children at the kitchen table and felt that familiar mix of love and desperation that defined his life. Carter erased his math homework for the third time, his brow furrowed in concentration. The boy was smart, scary smart, the kind of smart that should have meant advanced classes and college prep and a bright future. But Copper Ridge Elementary didn't have advanced classes anymore. They barely had regular classes. 2 teachers handled all the grades, working with ancient textbooks and broken computers. Riley hummed to herself as she colored, her tongue poking out the corner of her mouth the way it always did when she focused. She was drawing another house, this one with a big yard and a swing set and what looked like a pool in the back. Marcus's throat tightened. His 7-year-old daughter spent her free time drawing houses they'd never afford, lives they'd never live. "Daddy," Riley said without looking up, "when I grow up and have a big house, you and Carter can live with me. You can have your own rooms and everything." Marcus swallowed hard. "That's real sweet, baby. But you know what? You're going to have your own family someday. You won't want your old dad taking up space." "Yes, I will," Riley insisted, finally looking up at him with those huge brown eyes that were exactly like Angela's. "You can have the biggest room because you're the tallest." Carter glanced at his sister, then at Marcus, and something passed between father and son. An understanding. A shared knowledge that Riley's dreams were beautiful and heartbreaking because they came from a place of seeing how little they had. "That sounds perfect, Riley," Carter said, his voice gentle in a way that made him sound much older than 10. "We'll all live in your big house." Marcus excused himself, mumbled something about checking the mail, and stepped outside before the tears could come. The evening air was cooling finally, the brutal September heat giving way to the more tolerable October weather that was coming. He stood on the small porch, hands gripping the wooden railing, and let himself feel it all for just a moment. The exhaustion, the fear, the crushing weight of being solely responsible for 2 children in a town with no future. Then he pushed it down, locked it away, and went back inside to make dinner. Dinner was hamburger helper again, stretched with extra pasta and frozen peas to make it go further. Marcus had maybe $40 left until his next paycheck on Friday, and that had to cover gas for his truck, Riley's field trip fee, and the electric bill that was already 2 weeks overdue. He'd been juggling bills for so long that he'd become an expert at knowing which companies would give him an extra week, which would threaten shutoff, which would actually follow through. It was a humiliating skill to have, but it kept the lights on most of the time. After dinner, Marcus helped Carter with the math homework while Riley took a bath. The problems were about fractions, dividing up pizza slices and pie pieces, and Carter was getting frustrated. "I don't get it," Carter said, his voice tight. "Why does 3/4 plus 1/4 equal 1? That doesn't make sense." Marcus grabbed a piece of paper and drew a circle, divided it into 4 parts. "Okay, imagine this is a pizza. If you eat 3 slices out of 4 and then you eat 1 more slice, how many slices are left?" "None. You ate the whole pizza." "Right. And if you ate the whole pizza, you ate—" Carter's face cleared. "1 whole pizza. Oh, I get it." Marcus ruffled his son's hair. "You're smarter than you think, buddy. You just need to see it different sometimes." "Is that why you're good at fixing cars? Because you see things different?" Marcus paused. No one had ever asked him that before. "Yeah, I guess so. When someone brings in a car that won't start, I don't just see a broken car. I see all the systems that have to work together, and I figure out which one stopped doing its job. Then I fix that part, and the whole thing works again." Carter nodded slowly, processing. Do you think people are like that? Like if something's broken, you just need to figure out which part and fix it? Sometimes, Marcus said carefully, wondering where this was going. Why? Because I've been thinking. Our life is kind of broken, right? Like, we don't have a lot of money and Mom left and this house is… He gestured around at the peeling wallpaper and water-stained ceiling. Not great, but maybe there's just one thing that's broken, and if we could fix that one thing, everything else would work. Marcus felt his chest tighten. His 10-year-old son was trying to solve their poverty like a math problem, looking for the single broken part that could be repaired. It's more complicated than that with people stuff, Marcus said gently, but I appreciate you thinking about it. And hey, we're not broken. We're just going through a hard time. There's a difference. How long do hard times usually last? I don't know, buddy, but I promise you, I'm doing everything I can to make things better. Carter looked at him with eyes too old for his face. I know, Dad. I see you trying. After the kids were in bed, Marcus sat alone at the kitchen table with a cup of instant coffee that had gone cold while he stared at nothing. The house made its nighttime sounds around him, the fridge humming and clicking, the wind whistling through gaps in the windows, the pipes groaning in the walls. This was usually when the fear hit hardest, when the kids were asleep and he couldn't distract himself by being strong for them. This was when he let himself think about the numbers that didn't add up, the future that looked like more of the same, the slow drowning feeling of being trapped in circumstances he couldn't change. He pulled out his wallet and counted the cash inside. $37. In the bank, he had maybe $300, and that was supposed to last until next Friday. The electric bill was $80, which left $220 for gas, food, and whatever emergencies came up. There were always emergencies. Last week, Riley's shoes had fallen apart, the sole literally separating from the upper, and he'd had to buy her new ones at the discount store for $15. They weren't good shoes, the kind that would last maybe 3 months, but they were what he could afford. Carter needed new jeans because he was growing so fast that his current ones showed 3 inches of ankle, but that would have to wait. Marcus rubbed his eyes, exhaustion pressing down on him like a physical weight. He thought about Angela sometimes, wondered if she was happy in Phoenix, if she'd found what she was looking for. He hoped she had. He really did. He didn't hate her for leaving. He just wished she'd taken him with her, that they'd figured out how to escape together instead of her escaping alone. But wishing didn't change anything. He was here, she was there, and 2 kids were counting on him to keep it together. He was about to head to his couch when he remembered the mail he'd claimed to check earlier but hadn't actually looked at. He stepped outside and opened the rusty mailbox, pulling out a handful of envelopes. Bills, mostly. A flyer for a pizza place in the next town over that had probably closed by now. And near the bottom, something different. A bright yellow flyer, cheaply printed on colored paper. He almost threw it away without reading it, but something made him pause. The header read, Public Auction, Saturday, September 24th, 10 a.m. Marcus brought it inside and read it under the dim kitchen light. It was advertising an auction of defunct mining claims, old equipment, and miscellaneous lots from the various mining companies that had abandoned operations in the area. Most of it was junk, he figured, the kind of thing wealthy collectors from Phoenix bought to decorate their ranch houses with authentic mining memorabilia. There were pictures of antique mining carts, old pickaxes, lanterns. Stuff that meant nothing to people who'd actually worked the mines but looked rustic and charming to people with more money than sense. Marcus was about to throw it away when his eyes caught on a handwritten note at the bottom of the page, squeezed in like an afterthought. Lot 47. Silver Gorge Claim, Northwest Quadrant. No active operations since 1976. Estimated value undetermined. Starting bid $100. Silver Gorge. Marcus's heart stuttered. His grandfather, old Frank Webb, had worked Silver Gorge before it closed. Marcus had grown up hearing stories about those tunnels, about the labyrinth of shafts that connected under the mountains, about the sections that had been sealed off when the big companies consolidated operations and cut corners. Grandpa Frank used to say, half joking with a gleam in his eye, that there were fortunes still buried out there in tunnels nobody remembered, veins of ore that the companies had abandoned because they were chasing bigger deposits somewhere else. "Someone's going to strike it rich out there someday," he'd say, usually after a few beers. "Mark my words, those mountains haven't given up all their secrets yet." Marcus had dismissed it as old man rambling, the wishful thinking of someone who'd spent 40 years underground and wanted to believe it had meant something more than a paycheck. But sitting here in his dim kitchen, staring at this flyer, something stirred in his chest. Not quite hope, more like desperate curiosity. What if Grandpa Frank had been right? What if there was something out there? $100 for a 160-acre mining claim. Even if there was nothing valuable underneath, the land itself had to be worth something. Maybe he could resell it, make a small profit. Or maybe, just maybe, there was a reason nobody had bid on it yet. Maybe everyone else was smarter than him. Or maybe, and this was the thought that kept him awake for the next 2 hours, maybe everyone else had given up looking for miracles. Saturday morning arrived with that particular Arizona brightness that made everything look both beautiful and harsh at the same time, like the desert itself couldn't decide whether to welcome you or warn you away. Marcus left Carter in charge, something he hated doing but had no choice about. He gave them cereal, turned on cartoons, and made Carter promise 3 times that he wouldn't open the door for anyone and would call Marcus's cell if anything happened. "We'll be fine, Dad," Carter said with that forced maturity that broke Marcus's heart. "Riley and I will just watch TV and do our chores. You can trust me." "I know I can, buddy. I'll be back by lunch." Marcus drove his battered Ford Ranger into town, past buildings that used to be businesses and were now just empty shells with faded signs and broken windows. Past the old movie theater where he'd taken Angela on their first date, now boarded up with graffiti spray painted across the plywood. Past the elementary school where both his kids went, its playground equipment rusted and missing pieces that the school district couldn't afford to replace. Copper Ridge on a Saturday morning was a ghost town in the most literal sense, a place where the ghost of what it used to be haunted every street corner. The auction was being held in the parking lot behind the old Copper Ridge Mining Museum, a building that hadn't actually been open to visitors in 5 years because the county couldn't justify the expense of keeping it staffed. The parking lot was cracked asphalt with weeds pushing through, and someone had set up folding tables displaying rusted equipment under a canvas canopy that flapped in the morning breeze. Marcus counted maybe 30 people milling around, and he could tell immediately that most of them weren't locals. They wore expensive jeans and pristine boots that had never seen actual work, carried cameras to document their purchases, drove SUVs with Scottsdale and Phoenix dealer plates. These were the collectors, the weekenders, the people who bought mining artifacts to hang in their finished basements and tell stories about authentic Western heritage. Marcus parked his truck at the far edge of the lot, suddenly self-conscious about its primer gray fender and cracked windshield. He wore his cleanest jeans, which meant the ones without holes, and a button-up shirt that was slightly too big because he'd bought it years ago when he had 20 more pounds on him. He shoved his hands in his pockets and walked over to the tables, trying to blend in. The auctioneer was a leathery man named Dale Hutchins, who'd been running these sales for as long as Marcus could remember. Dale had that sun-damaged skin that came from decades in the Arizona heat, deep wrinkles around his eyes, and a neck that looked like leather that had been left out in the rain and dried too many times. He was setting up a microphone on a makeshift platform built from wooden pallets, testing it with that classic testing, 1-2 testing that all auctioneers seem to do. Marcus wandered among the tables, looking at the lots up for auction. There was a genuine ore cart from the 1880s, rusted but sturdy, starting bid $300. A collection of carbide lamps, some still functional, starting at $50 for the set. Photographs of mining operations from the early 1900s, men with mustaches and serious expressions standing in front of tunnel entrances, starting at $20 per photo. And then, off to the side on a separate table like it was an afterthought, a single manila folder labeled Lot 47, Land Claims. Marcus picked it up and flipped through the papers inside. A survey map from 1976 showing the Silver Gorge claim boundaries. A deed transfer from when the original Silver Gorge Mining Company had dissolved. A notice of abandoned claim from the county assessor's office dated 1998, and at the bottom a single sheet of paper that made Marcus's pulse quicken. A geological survey from 1947, faded and barely legible, but with words he could make out. Promising indicators, further exploration recommended, multiple mineral veins identified. "Thinking about bidding on the land?" a voice said behind him. Marcus turned to find Tommy Breslin standing there with a smirk on his face. Tommy had been in Marcus's graduating class at Copper Ridge High, back when the school still had enough students for a football team and a senior prom. Tommy had left for college, came back with a business degree and a chip on his shoulder about being smarter than everyone who'd stayed. Now he worked remotely for some tech company in California and spent his time acting superior to anyone who hadn't escaped like he had. "Maybe," Marcus said carefully, putting the folder back down. "You know that claim's worthless, right?" Tommy said loud enough that people nearby turned to look. "There's a reason it's been abandoned for 50 years. Whatever was there, they got it all out decades ago. You'd be buying 160 acres of rock and scrub brush." "Then why are you interested?" Marcus shot back. "I'm not. I just think it's funny that you'd even consider it." "But hey," Tommy grinned, "maybe you'll strike it rich. That would be something, wouldn't it?" Marcus Webb, the guy who changes oil at Patterson's shop, suddenly a millionaire because he bought a worthless mining claim. Marcus felt his face flush hot. Other people were definitely listening now, some trying to pretend they weren't. "It's $100 starting bid. I can afford to take a chance on $100. "Can you, though?" Tommy's voice was cruel now. "I heard you're 2 months behind on rent. Patterson told my dad he's thinking of letting you go because business is so slow. You've got 2 kids to feed. But sure, blow $100 on Fantasyland. That's real responsible parenting." Marcus's hands clenched into fists. He wanted to hit Tommy, wanted it so badly his knuckles ached. But he was 34 years old with 2 kids depending on him, and assault charges weren't going to help anyone. "You done?" Marcus asked quietly. "Yeah, I'm done. Just trying to help you avoid making a stupid mistake. But you do you, man. It's your money to waste." Tommy walked away, and Marcus heard him laughing with his friends, heard the word desperate and pathetic carrying across the parking lot. Marcus stood there breathing hard, trying to calm down, trying to not let the humiliation crush him. This was why Angela had left. This was the life she couldn't stand. Being poor in a small town where everyone knew your business, where your failures were public entertainment, where Tommy Breslin could mock you and you just had to take it because what else were you going to do? Dale Hutchins's voice crackled over the microphone. "All right, folks, let's get started. Thanks for coming out. We've got some great pieces of Copper Ridge history up for sale today. Let's begin with lot number 1, this beautiful ore cart from the Golden Eagle mine circa 1885. Marcus barely paid attention as the first 20 lots sold. The ore cart went for $420 to a man in a polo shirt who immediately started taking pictures of it with his phone. The carbide lamps sold for $90. A vintage mining helmet went for $200. The photographs sold individually, ranging from $30 to $70 each. Marcus watched the money change hands and felt sick. These people were dropping hundreds of dollars on decorations, on conversation pieces, while he was scraping together quarters to buy his daughter new shoes. Finally, Dale got to lot 47. "All right, folks," he announced, squinting at his clipboard. "This one's a little different. Silver Gorge mining claim, northwest quadrant of the old Silver Gorge operations. 160 acres of land including any and all mineral rights. No active operations since 1976. No guarantees, no recent surveys, no infrastructure. Basically, you're buying a piece of history, and whatever might or might not be underground, could be nothing, could be something. Who knows? He grinned like this was all a big joke. Starting bid, $100. Silence. Complete silence except for the wind making the canvas canopy flap. Someone in the back of the crowd chuckled. Someone else muttered something Marcus couldn't quite hear, but that sounded like waste of money. Dale waited, still grinning. Come on, folks. $100 for 160 acres and a story to tell your friends. Hell, you could camp out there, build a cabin someday. Anyone? More silence. Marcus felt 30 sets of eyes on him, felt them all knowing he was considering it, felt the judgment and amusement radiating from the crowd. Tommy Breslin was watching from the front row, arms crossed, smirk firmly in place. Do it, Marcus thought. Just raise your hand. Who cares what they think? But his hand stayed at his side, paralyzed by shame and fear and the weight of Tommy's words. $100. He needed that for groceries, for gas, for Riley's field trip fee. What was he thinking? This wasn't hope. This was desperation making him stupid. Going once, Dale said, his voice making it clear he expected no bids. Going twice. Marcus's hand shot up before he could stop it. $100, he called out, his voice steadier than he felt. The crowd turned as one. Tommy Breslin laughed out loud. Someone whispered, "No way." Someone else said, "Jesus, he's actually doing it." Dale looked genuinely surprised. "We've got $100 from Marcus Webb. Anyone want to go 150? Anyone?" Dead silence now, but not the silence of consideration. The silence of people watching someone make a mistake and knowing it. The silence of spectators at a car crash. "Going once at 100, Dale said. Going twice. And sold to Marcus Webb for $100. Congratulations, sir. See the payment table after we're done here." A smattering of laughter rippled through the crowd. Tommy turned to his friends and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I give him 6 months before he realizes he threw away $100 on absolutely nothing." Classic Webb move. All desperation, no sense. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, absorbing the mockery, feeling every eye on him. Then he turned and walked to his truck, not waiting for the auction to finish. He sat in the driver's seat with his hands on the steering wheel, breathing hard, asking himself what the hell he'd just done. He'd just spent $100, money they absolutely couldn't afford to lose, on what was almost certainly worthless land based on nothing more than his dead grandfather's wishful thinking and his own desperate need to believe in something, anything. He should go to the payment table, tell them he changed his mind, get his money back. But even as he thought it, Marcus knew he wouldn't. Something in him, some stubborn, irrational part that refused to accept that this was all his life would ever be, wouldn't let him walk away. Maybe Tommy was right. Maybe he was desperate and stupid. But he'd made the bid, and he was going to see it through. Marcus walked back to the payment table where a tired-looking woman with a clipboard waited. He pulled 5 $20 bills from his wallet, each one representing something they needed, something he should have spent it on instead. The woman barely looked at him as she took his money and handed him a receipt and a manila envelope containing the deed and survey documents. "Congratulations on your purchase," she said in a monotone that made it clear she thought he was an idiot. As Marcus walked back to his truck, deed in hand, he heard the whispers following him like a shadow. "Can't believe Webb threw away $100. Guess desperation makes you stupid. Single dad trying to strike it rich. Pathetic. That money could have bought his kids groceries, but he's out here playing minor." Marcus climbed into his truck, placed the envelope on the passenger seat, and sat there for a long moment. His hands were shaking, his face burned with humiliation, and some small, stubborn part of him whispered, What if they're all wrong? He started the engine and drove away from the laughter, from the judgment, from Tommy Breslin's smirk. He drove home to his children who were counting on him, who believed he knew what he was doing, who trusted him to take care of them. And Marcus Webb, struggling single father, object of his town's mockery and pity, made a promise to himself. Whatever happened next, whether he just made the biggest mistake of his life or stumbled onto something real, he would see it through. He would find out what his $100 had bought him. Because sometimes the only thing more dangerous than hope is having none left at all. Marcus drove home from the auction with the deed burning like a brand on the passenger seat beside him. Carter and Riley were exactly where he'd left them, watching cartoons and eating the cereal they'd had for breakfast. Riley jumped up when he walked in, launching herself at his legs for a hug. "Daddy, did you buy something cool?" Marcus picked her up, forced a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Maybe. I bought some land out in the desert." "Can we go see it?" Carter asked, looking up from his spot on the couch. The boy's eyes were sharp, already calculating, already trying to figure out if this was good news or bad news. "Not today, buddy. Maybe next weekend." But Marcus couldn't wait that long. The $100 he'd spent gnawed at him like a physical wound. He needed to know, needed to see what he'd actually bought. That night, after the kids were asleep, he spread the survey maps across the kitchen table and studied them by lamplight. The Silver Gorge claim was roughly 20 miles northwest of town, accessible by an old mining road that probably hadn't seen traffic in decades. The maps showed the basic topography, marked a few structures that were almost certainly long gone, and noted several tunnel entrances that had been sealed in 1976 when operations ceased. Marcus traced his finger along the property boundaries. 160 acres of desert and rock. His grandfather had worked these tunnels 40 years ago. Somewhere in Marcus's memory, buried under years of trying to forget the past and survive the present, were fragments of conversations. Grandpa Frank at Thanksgiving dinner, bourbon in hand, telling stories. "They sealed up the northwest section," he'd said once, claimed the veins had played out. "But I always wondered if they just didn't want to spend the money to chase them deeper. Corporate types, they look at a balance sheet, not at what's actually in the ground." Marcus closed his eyes, trying to remember more. There had been something else, something about unauthorized exploration, about Grandpa Frank and a few other miners going back after the official closure to check things themselves. But the memory was hazy, distorted by time and the fact that Marcus had been maybe 9 years old when he'd heard it. Monday morning, Marcus called in sick to Patterson's auto repair. His boss, Old Man Patterson, sounded annoyed but not surprised. "You've got 3 sick days left this year, Webb. Use them wisely." Marcus knew it was a warning. Patterson had been looking for reasons to cut staff, and giving him one wasn't smart. But he couldn't help it. He needed to see the property. He needed to know if he'd just thrown away money they desperately needed or if there was even the slimmest chance his grandfather had been right. He left before Carter's bus came, left a note saying he'd be back by dinner, left $20 on the counter in case they needed anything. Then he drove northwest out of Copper Ridge, past the town limits where the paved road gave way to dirt and gravel. The landscape here was harsh and beautiful in the way only the desert could be, all red rock and scattered creosote bushes, mountains in the distance that looked purple in the morning light. The sky was huge and empty, the kind of sky that made you feel both insignificant and strangely hopeful at the same time. The mining road was barely there anymore, more suggestion than actual road. Marcus's truck bounced over ruts and washouts, scraped against rocks that had tumbled into the path. Twice he had to stop and move debris out of the way. After 30 minutes of slow progress, he reached a rusted chain-link fence half swallowed by wind-blown sand. A faded sign hung crooked on the gate. Silver Gorge Mining Company private property. No trespassing. Marcus cut the padlock with bolt cutters from his truck bed, the rust making it easier than it should have been. He drove through and continued another mile until the road ended at what had obviously been a staging area decades ago. Concrete foundations marked where buildings once stood, sections of rail track poked through the sand like bones. A water tank lay on its side, riddled with bullet holes from target practice. And scattered everywhere were pieces of equipment that had been too heavy or worthless to haul away. A collapsed conveyor belt, tangles of cable, broken wooden crates. At the far end of the clearing, built into the hillside, was the entrance. Marcus saw it and felt his breath catch. The opening was maybe 8 feet tall and 12 feet wide, reinforced with timber beams that had weathered to gray. Rocks and debris partially blocked it, deliberate attempts to seal it, but there was still space to squeeze through if you were determined or stupid enough. Marcus grabbed his flashlight from the truck, a heavy-duty one he used for working under cars. He texted Carter. "Out checking the property, back by 3, love you both." Then he approached the entrance, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was stupid. This was dangerous. The tunnels had been abandoned for almost 50 years. They could collapse. There could be bad air, unstable ground, 1,000 ways to die underground that his rational mind was suddenly very aware of. But he kept walking. The opening was dark and cool, a mouth that exhaled stale air that smelled of dust and stone and time. Marcus squeezed through the gap in the rocks, felt them scrape against his shoulders, and then he was inside. The beam of his flashlight cut through absolute darkness, illuminating walls of rough-hewn rock. Old mining rails ran along the floor, disappearing into shadow. Timber supports held up the ceiling at regular intervals, and Marcus sent up a silent prayer that they were still sound. He moved forward carefully, testing each step before putting his weight down. The tunnel ran straight for maybe 50 yards, then branched. Left descended at a steep angle. Right continued level. Marcus went right, following what looked like the main passage. The tunnel opened into a wider chamber, and here Marcus found evidence of the old operation. Niches carved into walls where equipment had once sat, hooks still bolted into the rock, initials and dates carved by bored miners. JW 1974, one read. RF plus MK, said another inside a lopsided heart. Marcus found old carbide lamps, a lunch pail rusted shut, a jacket so deteriorated it crumbled when he touched it. These were the ghosts of working men, of his grandfather's generation, of people who'd spent their lives underground chasing ore. He checked his watch. 11:15. He should head back. But something made him pause. Near the back of the chamber, barely visible in the beam of his flashlight, there was another opening. Not a tunnel exactly, more like someone had deliberately stacked rocks to block something. Marcus approached, shined his light through gaps in the stones. Darkness beyond, but a different quality of darkness, deeper somehow. He grabbed a crowbar from his belt, one he'd brought more out of habit than planning, and started pulling rocks away. They came loose easier than expected, tumbling with echoing clatters that made him flinch. Within 20 minutes, he'd cleared enough space to see what lay behind. Another tunnel, narrower than the others, barely wide enough for one person. And unlike everything else he'd seen, the walls here gleamed faintly in his flashlight beam, crystalline, reflective, like someone had embedded glass in the rock. Marcus's heart started pounding. He squeezed through the opening and moved carefully forward. The narrow tunnel twisted left, dropped slightly, then twisted right. The crystalline quality of the walls became more pronounced. He ran his fingers along the surface and they came away dusty but with a strange grittiness, like the texture was different from ordinary rock. The tunnel opened suddenly into something that stole his breath and made him forget how to breathe. A cavern, maybe 30 feet across and who knew how deep, the ceiling disappearing into shadow above his head. And the walls weren't just gleaming, they were veined with minerals that caught his light and threw it back in colors he didn't have names for. Blues so deep they looked almost black, greens that seemed to glow from within, purples that shifted as he moved the flashlight. Massive crystal formations jutted from floor and ceiling like frozen waterfalls. In places, the rock face showed exposed seams of something metallic, rust-colored but dense, heavy-looking. Marcus stood frozen, his flashlight trembling in his hand. He wasn't a geologist. He didn't have a degree in mining, but he'd grown up in Copper Ridge, had absorbed knowledge through osmosis just by living in a mining town his whole life. He knew what copper looked like, what silver looked like, what iron ore looked like. This wasn't any of those. This was something else, something that made the educated part of his brain whisper words like rare earth elements, strategic minerals, the kind of stuff that went into smartphones and military technology and was worth obscene amounts of money. He moved deeper into the cavern, his boots crunching on loose rock. Everywhere he looked, he saw more veins, more deposits, more crystalline structures that suggested a mineral concentration far beyond anything that should exist in a supposedly played-out mine. Then he noticed something else, evidence of old mining activity. Drill holes still visible in the rock face, tool marks where someone had taken samples, and in one corner, partially hidden behind a collapsed section of rock, a small wooden crate. Marcus knelt beside it, his hands shaking now. The crate was old, the wood dry and brittle, but the brass hinges still worked. He pried it open and found glass jars inside, wrapped in oilcloth that crumbled at his touch. Each jar was filled with mineral samples, chunks of rock in various colors, each with a handwritten label attached with string. Marcus held one up to his flashlight and read the faded ink. Bastnasite sample, Northwest Vein, 1947. His heart nearly stopped. Bastnasite. Even he knew that name. It was a rare earth mineral, one of the most valuable ones. Used in everything from electric car batteries to wind turbines to guided missiles. Worth thousands of dollars per kilogram in its refined form. He grabbed another jar. Monazite, Sealing Deposit, 1947. Another, Xenotime, East Wall, 1947. Marcus sat back on his heels, breathing hard, trying to process what he was seeing. 1947. Someone had been here, had found these deposits, had carefully labeled and stored samples. And then what? Sealed it up? Abandoned it? Why would anyone walk away from this? He pulled out his phone, hoping against hope for signal. Nothing. He was too deep, too far underground. He started taking pictures anyway, dozens of them, trying to capture the scale, the colors, the sheer magnitude of what he was looking at. The camera couldn't do it justice. The veins looked smaller in photos, the colors washed out. But it was something, evidence that he wasn't hallucinating. Marcus checked his watch, 12:45. He needed to get back. Carter and Riley would worry if he was late. But leaving felt impossible, felt like abandoning treasure, like walking away from a winning lottery ticket. He forced himself to move, to retrace his steps through the narrow tunnel, through the chamber, back to the entrance. When he emerged into daylight, the sun was so bright it hurt his eyes. He stood there, covered in dust, breathing hard, his mind racing. This changed everything. If what he'd found was real, if those minerals were actually what the labels said they were, he wasn't just the owner of worthless desert scrubland. He was sitting on a fortune. But first, he needed to be sure. And he needed to be quiet. Marcus drove back to Copper Ridge in a daze, barely aware of the road. His truck found its way home on autopilot. Carter and Riley were watching TV when he walked in, and they looked up with relief. "Dad, you're dirty," Riley said, wrinkling her nose. "What were you doing?" "Just exploring the property, baby. Lots of dust out there." He showered, scrubbing red dirt from his skin, and tried to think. Who could he trust? Who could analyze what he'd found without word getting out? Copper Ridge was too small. Everyone knew everyone's business. If he went to anyone local, it would be all over town by morning. He needed someone outside, someone professional, someone with no connection to this place. That evening, after the kids were in bed, Marcus sat at his laptop and started researching. He learned that rare earth minerals were called rare not because they were scarce, but because they occurred in low concentrations and were expensive to extract. A commercially viable deposit needed to hit certain thresholds of purity and quantity. But when they did, when someone found a genuine rare earth deposit, the value was staggering. China controlled 80% of the world's rare earth production, and the United States had been scrambling for years to reduce that dependence. A major American deposit, especially one that was privately owned rather than tied up in federal lands and regulations, would be worth hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe more. Marcus's hands were shaking as he typed. He found a geological surveying firm in Tucson called Huang and Associates, 3 hours away. Their website said they specialized in mineral assays and property surveys. He drafted an email, deleted it, drafted another. Finally, he sent, "I have rock samples from a private mining claim that need analysis, specifically testing for rare earth mineral content. What would this cost, and how quickly could you provide results?" The response came the next morning while Marcus was changing oil in a Honda Civic at Patterson's shop. His phone dinged with an email from someone named Dr. Gerald Huang. Rare earth assays require specialized equipment and testing protocols. Cost for comprehensive analysis, $2,000. Turnaround time, 5 to 7 business days. Can you bring samples to our Tucson office? $2,000. Marcus stared at the number. He had maybe $800 in his checking account after paying rent and bills. His credit cards were maxed. He had nothing left to sell except his truck, and he needed that to get to work. He stood there under the Honda, oil dripping onto his face, and felt the walls closing in. He'd found what might be a fortune, but he couldn't afford the $2,000 to verify it. The irony was crushing. That afternoon, Marcus did something he'd never done before. He went to the Copper Ridge Credit Union and asked about a personal loan. The loan officer, a woman named Sandra Chen who'd gone to high school with Angela, looked at his application with sympathy and regret. "Marcus, I wish I could help you, but with your debt-to-income ratio and your credit score, I can't approve this. I'm sorry." "What if I used the mining claim as collateral?" Marcus asked desperately. "It's 160 acres. That has to be worth something." Sandra pulled up the property records. According to the county assessor, the land is valued at $1,200. "I can't loan you $2,000 against $1,200 collateral. That doesn't make sense." Marcus left the credit union feeling like he was drowning. He had the answer to all his problems sitting in a cavern under the desert, but it might as well be on the moon for all the good it did him. That night, he lay on his couch staring at the ceiling, mind churning. He thought about selling his tools, the good ones he'd collected over years. Maybe he could get $500 for the set. His TV might be worth $50. He could skip paying the electric bill this month, risk a shutoff, use that $80. He was still calculating when his phone rang at 11:30. Unknown number. Marcus almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Hello? Mr. Webb, this is Trevor Holt. I'm with Apex Mining Corporation. I hope I'm not calling too late." Marcus sat up, suddenly alert. "Who?" "Apex Mining. We're a resource development company based in Denver. I understand you recently purchased a property at Silver Gorge. I'm calling because Apex has interest in that area, and we'd like to discuss a potential acquisition." Marcus's mouth went dry. "How did you know I bought that property?" "Auction records are public, Mr. Webb, and Apex monitors land transactions in regions where we operate. We're always looking for opportunities to consolidate claims and optimize development. I'd like to make you an offer." "I'm not interested in selling." Trevor's voice remained smooth, professional. "You haven't heard the offer yet. $500,000, cash. For a property you paid $100 for. That's quite a return on investment, wouldn't you say?" Marcus's heart hammered. $500,000. That would solve every problem, pay every debt, give Carter and Riley everything. But something made him hesitate. Why would you pay $500,000 for a property you think is worth $100? Let's just say Apex is very good at seeing long-term value, and we prefer to be generous with small claim holders. It makes for good community relations. What do you say, Mr. Webb? Shall we set up a meeting to finalize the paperwork? Every instinct Marcus had screamed danger. If Apex was offering $500,000 for land they thought was worthless, it meant they knew something. It meant word had somehow leaked. It meant he was already out of time. I need to think about it, Marcus said carefully. Trevor's voice cooled slightly. Of course. But Mr. Webb, I should mention that operating a mine requires extensive permitting, environmental studies, infrastructure investments. Very expensive, very time-consuming. Apex has the resources and expertise to handle all of that. A private individual would find it extremely challenging. I'd hate to see you invest time and money into something that ultimately proves impossible to develop. Is that a threat? Not at all, just friendly advice. I'll call you tomorrow to follow up. Have a good evening, Mr. Webb. The line went dead. Marcus sat in the dark, his hands shaking. Someone knew. Somehow, someone knew what he'd found. He called the number back. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. You've reached Trevor Holt at Apex Mining. Please leave a message. Marcus didn't leave one. He pulled out his laptop and searched Apex Mining Corporation. What he found made his stomach drop. Apex was huge, a multi-billion-dollar company with operations across 6 states. They specialized in rare earth mining and processing, and according to their most recent press releases, they were aggressively acquiring properties to secure domestic rare earth supply chains. Marcus's mind raced. How did they know? He'd told no one except Dr. Huang, and that was just an email inquiry. Had someone followed him to the site? Were they monitoring county records that closely? Or was it simpler? Was there something about the property itself, some existing survey, some corporate knowledge that made them watch anyone who bought it? He went back through the deed documents from the auction. At the bottom of one page, in fine print he'd barely glanced at before, was a notation. Property subject to existing mineral surveys filed 1947, 1952, 1976. Copies available through county archives. Marcus's blood went cold. The surveys were public record. Anyone could access them. If Apex had been monitoring the area, they would know exactly what was there. They'd probably been waiting for decades for the property to come available, and he'd bought it out from under them. The next morning, Marcus called in sick again. Patterson's voice on the phone was sharp with irritation. Webb, you're putting me in a bad position here. I've got 3 cars waiting and no mechanic. I know, I'm sorry. I'll be in tomorrow, I promise. You better be, because I can't keep someone who's not reliable. Marcus hung up and immediately called Dr. Huang's office. The receptionist answered cheerfully. Huang and Associates, how can I help you? This is Marcus Webb. I emailed yesterday about rare earth assays. I need to come in today. Is Dr. Huang available? Let me check his schedule. Can you hold? Marcus paced his small living room while generic hold music played. Carter was at school. Riley was at school. He had maybe 6 hours before they got home. Finally, the receptionist came back. Mr. Webb, Dr. Huang can see you at 2 o'clock if you can make it to Tucson. I'll be there. Marcus threw rock samples into a backpack, the ones he'd chipped off the cavern walls yesterday when he'd gone back at dawn before the kids woke up. He'd collected maybe 5 pounds of material, different colors, different veins, trying to get a representative sample. Then he got in his truck and drove, pushing 70 on the highway, his mind spinning with everything that could go wrong. Dr. Huang's office was in an industrial park on the east side of Tucson, a concrete building that looked more like a warehouse than a laboratory. Marcus found the right suite and walked into a waiting room that smelled like coffee and something chemical. The receptionist, a kind-faced woman named Sandra, offered him water and told him Dr. Huang would be right out. 20 minutes later, a door opened and a man emerged who looked nothing like Marcus expected. Gerald Huang was maybe 60, Asian American with silver hair and the calloused hands of someone who'd spent time in the field. He wore jeans and a work shirt, reading glasses hanging from a cord around his neck. "Mr. Webb, come on back." Marcus followed him into an office lined with rock samples and geological maps. Dr. Huang gestured to a chair. "Sandra said you have samples for rare earth analysis. Can I see them?" Marcus pulled the rocks from his backpack and spread them on the desk. Dr. Huang picked up one, turned it over, held it to the light. His eyebrows raised. He picked up another, examined it closely, then grabbed a jeweler's loupe from his desk and studied the third sample. The room was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and Marcus's heart pounding in his ears. Finally, Dr. Huang looked up. "Where did you get these?" "Property I own, mining claim outside Copper Ridge." "And you're sure this is your property? Clear title?" Marcus nodded and pulled out the deed. Dr. Huang studied it, then looked back at the samples. "Mr. Webb, I've been doing this for 38 years. I've analyzed ore from 6 continents. These samples, if they're representative of a larger deposit, are some of the richest rare earth concentrations I've seen outside of China. The bastnasite alone, just from visual inspection, looks to be commercially viable grade." Marcus couldn't breathe. "What does that mean?" "It means you might have something very significant, but I need to do proper analysis to be sure. XRF spectroscopy, chemical assays, the full suite of tests. That's what the $2,000 covers." "I don't have $2,000, Marcus said quietly. "I have maybe 800. Dr. Huang studied him. "How much land are we talking about?" 160 acres. "And how large is the exposed deposit you sampled from?" "I don't know exactly. A cavern maybe 30 feet across, veins everywhere, multiple chambers connecting. I didn't explore it all." Dr. Huang leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Webb, if what you're describing is accurate, and if these samples test the way I think they will, you're not talking about thousands of dollars of value. You're talking about hundreds of millions." The room tilted. Marcus gripped the arms of his chair. "What?" "Rare earth minerals are strategic resources. The United States is desperate to reduce dependence on Chinese production. A major domestic deposit, privately owned, would be extremely valuable. But you need to understand something." Dr. Huang's expression became serious. "The moment word gets out, you'll have every mining company in North America trying to take this from you. They'll challenge your claim. They'll offer you money, then lowball you when you're desperate. They'll tie you up in legal battles you can't afford. You need to be very, very careful." "Someone already called me," Marcus admitted. "Apex Mining. They offered $500,000. Dr. Huang's face darkened. "Of course they did. Apex has been trying to corner the rare earth market for years. 500,000 is an insult if this deposit is what I think it is. Do not sell to them. Do not even talk to them. But I need money to verify what I have, and I can't afford your fee." Dr. Huang was quiet for a long moment. Then he made a decision. "I'll make you a deal. Bring me proper samples. I'll do the analysis at cost, $1,200. If the results confirm commercial viability, I'll front the money for a full property survey, $20,000. In exchange, when you're ready to develop this, I want to be your consulting geologist. Standard industry rates. Fair?" Marcus's throat was tight. "Why would you do that?" "Because I've seen too many small claim holders get destroyed by corporations. And because if this is real, it's the find of a lifetime. I want to be part of it." He extended his hand. "Deal?" Marcus shook it. "Deal." "Good. Now, you said Apex already contacted you. That means they're watching. You need to move fast, and you need to move quietly. Can you do that?" Marcus thought about Carter and Riley, about the cottage they rented, about Patterson threatening to fire him. "I don't have a choice." That night, As Marcus drove back to Copper Ridge with Dr. Huang's business card in his pocket and a timeline for testing in his head, his phone rang again. Unknown number. He answered. Hello? Mr. Webb, it's Trevor Holt from Apex. Have you had time to consider our offer? I'm not interested. That's unfortunate. Because I should let you know, Apex has done extensive research on Silver Gorge. We're aware of the historical surveys. We know what's there, and we know that a private individual will find it nearly impossible to develop without our help. Permits alone will take years. Environmental reviews will cost millions. You'll be fighting battles you can't win. Then why do you want to buy it? Trevor's voice hardened. Because we prefer to handle this cooperatively. But if you're going to be difficult, there are other approaches, ways to make your life very complicated. I'm offering you an easy exit. $500,000 is more money than you'll ever see otherwise. Take it and walk away. And if I don't? Then you'll wish you had. Think about your kids, Mr. Webb. Think about what's best for them. I'll call again in a few days. The line went dead. Marcus pulled over to the side of the highway, his hands shaking. This was real. The threat was real. Apex wasn't going to let this go. And he was just one broke mechanic with 2 kids and no resources to fight a billion-dollar corporation. But as he sat there in his truck, watching the sun set over the desert, Marcus made a decision. He'd spent his whole life accepting less than he deserved because he didn't have the power to demand more. He'd watched his town die, his marriage fail, his dreams shrink. He'd let Tommy Breslin mock him, let people pity him, let the world tell him this was all he'd ever be. But not this time. This time, he had something worth fighting for. And he was going to fight, even if it destroyed him, because his kids deserved a father who didn't quit when things got hard. He started the truck and headed home, where Carter and Riley waited, where $800 in his bank account somehow had to become $1,200, where a cavern full of minerals worth hundreds of millions sat under his land waiting. The war hadn't started yet, but Marcus Webb could feel it coming. Dr. Huang called 3 days later while Marcus was underneath a Dodge Ram at Patterson's shop. The preliminary tests were done, and Gerald's voice was tight with controlled excitement. Marcus, you need to come to Tucson, today if possible, and bring a lawyer. Marcus rolled out from under the truck, oil dripping onto his face. What did you find? Not over the phone, just get here. Marcus told Patterson he had a family emergency which earned him a look that said his job was hanging by a thread. He didn't care. He drove to Tucson with his heart in his throat, walked into Dr. Huang's office, and found himself facing not just Gerald, but a woman in a sharp business suit who introduced herself as Michelle Ortega, mineral rights attorney. Marcus, Gerald began, sliding a report across the desk. The bastnasite concentration in your samples is 0.92%. The monazite is 0.67%. Those are commercially viable numbers. Extremely viable. Based on conservative extrapolation from your core samples and the cavern size you described, you're sitting on approximately 370 million tons of ore. Marcus stared at the numbers swimming on the page. What does that mean in actual dollars? Michelle leaned forward. At current market prices, with extraction and processing costs factored in, you're looking at somewhere between $230 and $270 million over the life of the mine, possibly more if rare earth prices continue rising, which they will. The room spun. Marcus gripped the edge of the desk. $250 million. Give or take, Gerald confirmed. Marcus, this is a generational discovery. This changes everything. But, Michelle interrupted, her voice sharp with warning, you need to understand what you're up against. Apex Mining already knows. They've been monitoring this property for decades. They'll come at you with everything they have. Legal challenges, regulatory delays, political pressure. They'll try to break you financially and emotionally. My job is to make sure they don't succeed. How much do you cost? Marcus asked quietly. My retainer is $20,000. Marcus felt sick. I have $800 in my checking account. Michelle and Gerald exchanged a look. We anticipated that, Michelle said. Dr. Huang and I have been discussing a partnership structure. Cascade Mining Resources, a mid-sized firm that Gerald has worked with before, is interested in funding development in exchange for a 30% stake in net proceeds. They'll cover all legal fees, surveying costs, permits, everything. You keep 70% ownership and final decision-making authority. 70% of $250 million is still $175 million, Gerald added. And you won't have to fight this alone. Marcus's throat was tight. When do we start? We already have, Michelle said. I filed your claim documentation with the Bureau of Land Management this morning. Cascade is sending a geological team to do comprehensive surveys starting Monday. And Marcus, from this point forward you say nothing to anyone. Not your friends, not your neighbors, especially not Apex. Everything goes through me. Understood? Marcus nodded. That same night, Trevor Holt called again. Marcus let it go to voicemail. The message was brief and cold. Mr. Webb, you're making a serious mistake. Apex Mining always gets what it wants, one way or another. The legal papers arrived on a Friday afternoon. Marcus was picking Riley up from school when a courier handed him an envelope. Inside was a motion filed by Apex Mining Corporation challenging his mineral rights claim on grounds of procedural irregularities in the original 1976 property transfer. They were arguing that Silver Gorge Mining Company hadn't properly dissolved, that the claim had never legally reverted to county surplus, that Marcus's purchase at auction was therefore invalid. Michelle called within an hour. It's bullshit. Complete bullshit. But it's effective bullshit because it triggers an automatic hold on any development activity until the challenge is resolved. They're buying time to find other angles to attack you. How long? Could be months, could be a year, depends on how much money they want to throw at it. Marcus sat in his truck outside the elementary school, watching Riley play on the swings, and felt the walls closing in. He couldn't wait a year. Patterson had already cut his hours. The rent was due in 2 weeks. He was living on credit card cash advances and prayers. What do I do? You survive, and you trust me to fight this. But surviving got harder every day. Word spread through Copper Ridge like wildfire. Marcus Webb, the broke mechanic everyone pitied, had supposedly found something valuable on that worthless land everyone had laughed at him for buying. The story grew with each telling. Some said it was gold, others said silver. A few whispered about rare minerals worth billions. Nobody knew the truth, but everyone had an opinion. Tommy Breslin showed up at Patterson's shop one afternoon, leaning against the bay door with that familiar smirk. So I hear you actually found something out there. Lucky break for a guy like you. Marcus didn't look up from the engine he was working on. Don't know what you're talking about. Come on, man. Whole town knows. Apex Mining filed legal papers. That doesn't happen over worthless dirt. How much are they offering you now? $1 million? $2 million? Not your business, Tommy. Just saying, if someone offered me millions for $100 investment, I'd take it and run. But maybe you're smarter than you look. Maybe you're holding out for more. Tommy's voice dropped, became nastier. Or maybe you're just too stupid to know when you're out of your depth. Marcus set down his wrench carefully, stood up slowly, and turned to face Tommy. He was 3 inches taller and 50 pounds heavier, all of it from manual labor. Get out of my shop. Not your shop, it's Patterson's, and from what I hear, not for much longer. Marcus took a step forward. Tommy took a step back. I said get out. After Tommy left, Marcus's hands shook so badly he couldn't hold tools. He wasn't a violent man. He'd never thrown a punch in his adult life. But the rage that coursed through him was terrifying in its intensity. He wanted to hurt Tommy, wanted to hurt Trevor Holt, wanted to hurt everyone who'd spent years treating him like he was worthless and now looked at him with jealousy and contempt. That night, someone slashed his tires, all 4 of them sitting in the driveway of his rental cottage. The next morning, Marcus found a note under his windshield wiper. "Take the money and leave. You don't belong here anymore." Carter saw the tires, saw the note, and his young face went hard. "Dad, why do people hate us?" Marcus knelt down to his son's level. "They don't hate us. They hate that we might have something they don't. Fear makes people mean." "Are we in danger?" Marcus wanted to lie, to reassure, but Carter deserved truth. "Maybe, but I'm going to keep you safe. I promise." He bought new tires with a credit card that was already maxed, adding another $400 to debt he couldn't pay. He installed security cameras around the cottage that he couldn't really afford but needed anyway. And he started watching the shadows, started checking his rearview mirror, started living with the constant low-level fear that Apex wasn't done with threats. The town divided itself without anyone officially declaring sides. Maria Santos at the diner made it clear she supported Marcus, gave his kids free meals, told anyone who'd listen that it was about time someone from Copper Ridge caught a break. Father Miguel at the Catholic Church offered quiet support, let Marcus know the church would help if things got desperate. Old man Richie started showing up at the cottage in the evenings, sitting on the porch with Marcus, not saying much but making his presence known. Protection of a sort. But others turned cold. The cashier at the grocery store, who'd always been friendly, now rang up Marcus's purchases in silence. The school secretary, who used to chat with him at pickup, avoided eye contact. Patterson finally pulled him aside at the shop and delivered the news Marcus had been dreading. "Webb, I got to let you go. Business is slow and you've been unreliable lately. I'll give you through the end of the month." "It's not about business," Marcus said quietly. "Someone got to you." Patterson wouldn't meet his eyes. "I got pressures you don't understand. I'm sorry." 2 weeks of severance, then nothing. Marcus went home and told Carter and Riley that Daddy was between jobs, that it would be okay, that they'd figure it out. Riley cried. Carter just nodded, his face carefully blank, trying to be strong for his sister. That night, Marcus sat alone and added up the numbers. Rent due in 1 week, $450. Electricity bill already late, $87. Credit card minimums, $230. Groceries, gas, phone, another $300. He needed at least $1,067 and had maybe $200. The eviction notice came on a Tuesday. Mrs. Castellano delivered it herself, apologetic but firm. "Marcus, I've carried you as long as I can. My daughter says if I don't start eviction proceedings, she'll take over the property management. I need you out by the 30th. Mrs. Castellano, please. The mining deal is almost finalized. I just need 1 more month." She shook her head, genuine sadness in her eyes. "That's what you said last month. I'm sorry, Marcus. I really am." Carter overheard. That night, Marcus found his son crying silently in the sun porch, face pressed into his pillow. "We're going to be homeless, aren't we?" Marcus sat on the edge of the narrow bed and pulled Carter against his chest. "No. We're going to be fine." "How? You don't have a job. Everyone hates us. They're kicking us out." Carter's voice broke. "Why is this happening? You found something good. Why does that make everything worse?" Marcus had no answer that made sense. How do you explain to a 10-year-old that finding a fortune can be more dangerous than staying poor? That powerful people would rather destroy you than let you win? That the world wasn't fair and sometimes doing the right thing cost everything? "I'm fighting for us," Marcus finally said. "For you and Riley, for our future. It's hard right now, but I promise you I'm not going to let us lose." "What if you can't stop it?" "Then we lose fighting. But we don't lose because we gave up." The next morning, Michelle called with worse news. "Apex has bought up 3 properties adjacent to yours. They're claiming right-of-way issues, saying you can't access your mine without crossing their land. They're also filing environmental complaints with the EPA, claiming potential groundwater contamination. It's all garbage, but each complaint triggers reviews that add months to the timeline. "How long until I see any money from this?" Marcus asked desperately. "If everything goes perfectly, 6 months until Cascade can begin operations, another 3 months until first extraction, so 9 months minimum. I have 1 week until I'm evicted." Silence. Then Michelle's voice, carefully controlled. "I'll talk to Cascade about an advance against future proceeds. No promises." What happens next will turn this fight upside down, reveal a conspiracy nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. The call came at 2 in the morning. Marcus's phone vibrated on the floor beside the couch where he'd finally fallen into exhausted sleep. He fumbled for it, heart pounding. Unknown number. "Hello?" Heavy breathing. Then a voice, distorted, mechanical. "Your kids ride the school bus, number 43, 7:15 pickup. Think about that." The line went dead. Marcus was on his feet, adrenaline flooding his system. He checked on Riley and Carter, both sleeping peacefully, then stood in their doorway with his phone clutched in his shaking hand. They'd threatened his children. Someone had actually threatened his children. He called Michelle. She answered after 4 rings, voice thick with sleep. "Marcus, what's wrong?" he told her. There was a long pause. "Call the police, now. File a report. I'm calling Cascade's security team." The Copper Ridge police sent an officer, a young guy named Jason Torres, who looked maybe 25, and took notes with the kind of skepticism that said he thought Marcus was overreacting. "Mr. Webb, I understand you're under stress, but we get a lot of false reports. Kids pranking, ex-spouses playing mind games. Without caller ID or a direct threat, there's not much we can do. They mentioned my kid's school bus, the specific bus number. That's not a prank. I'll file the report, maybe increase patrols around your street, but honestly, if someone wanted to hurt you, this wouldn't be how they'd do it." After the officer left, Marcus didn't sleep. He sat on the porch with a tire iron beside him, watching the street, jumping at every car that passed. At 6 in the morning, he called Patterson and quit before he could be fired, told him he was done, didn't need the last 2 weeks. Then he drove Carter and Riley to school himself, told them he'd be picking them up from now on. "Is someone trying to hurt us?" Riley asked, her small voice frightened. "No, baby, just being careful." But the fear in her eyes said she knew he was lying. That same day, Marcus got a visitor. A woman in her 50s, gray hair pulled back, wearing dusty jeans and a work shirt. She knocked on his door and introduced herself as Susan Kimball, retired county clerk. "Mr. Webb, I heard you're having troubles with Apex Mining over the Silver Gorge claim." "Word gets around." "It does. And I thought you should know something. Back in 1976, when Silver Gorge Mining Company supposedly dissolved and abandoned their claims, something didn't sit right with me. I was working in the county recorder's office then, just a clerk, but I noticed discrepancies in the paperwork." Marcus's attention sharpened. What kind of discrepancies? The dissolution documents were filed by a company called Western Consolidated Mining. They claimed they'd purchased Silver Gorge's assets as part of bankruptcy proceedings, but I could never find the actual bankruptcy filing. It was like it just vanished from the records. "What does that mean?" Susan pulled a folder from her bag. "It means I kept copies, because I had a feeling someday someone would need them. Western Consolidated Mining, it turns out, was a shell company. And if you trace the ownership back far enough, guess who created it? Apex. Apex's predecessor company, yes. They engineered a fake bankruptcy to acquire Silver Gorge's claims cheaply. except one claim slipped through, probably because of sloppy paperwork. Yours, Lot 47. When it ended up in county surplus, they just waited. Figured eventually they'd buy it themselves or it would stay abandoned. Marcus stared at the documents. Why are you telling me this? Because I watched this town die while companies like Apex picked the bones. My husband worked those mines for 30 years, got black lung and a pension that barely covered cat food. I'm tired of them winning. These documents prove fraud in the original acquisition that voids any claim they might have to the surrounding properties. This could change everything. That's why I'm here. Use them. Fight back. Marcus called Michelle immediately. She was in Copper Ridge by evening, going through Susan's documents with increasing excitement. This is massive. If we can prove the original dissolution was fraudulent, Apex's property acquisitions around your claim are invalid. They based those purchases on ownership that never legally existed. Can we use this? Absolutely. I'm filing an amended response to their legal challenge tomorrow, including allegations of fraud. This flips the entire case. Suddenly they're on defense. The counterattack began. Michelle's filing made local news first, then regional. Mining company accused of decades-old fraud, read the headlines. Suddenly reporters were calling. A journalist from Phoenix drove out to interview Marcus, who declined on Michelle's advice. But the story spread anyway, and public opinion began to shift. This wasn't just a broke mechanic trying to cash in. This was David versus Goliath. This was a single father standing up to corporate corruption. Cascade Mining came through with an advance, $5 million against future proceeds. The money hit Marcus's account on a gray November morning. He stared at the number on his phone screen, barely processing it. $5 million. He paid off every debt. Paid Mrs. Castellano 6 months' rent in advance and watched her cry with relief. Bought Carter and Riley new clothes, new shoes, new winter coats. Took them to dinner at the one nice restaurant between Copper Ridge and Tucson. But he didn't celebrate, because he knew this was just the beginning. Apex responded to Michelle's fraud allegations with a motion to dismiss, calling the claims baseless and defamatory. They brought in a team of lawyers, 6 of them, who descended on the county courthouse like a corporate army. Michelle stood alone against them in the preliminary hearing, argued for 2 hours, and somehow won. The judge denied Apex's motion to dismiss and ordered discovery to proceed. If there's evidence of fraud in the original property transfers, the judge ruled, this court needs to examine it. Trevor Holt called Marcus directly, violating Michelle's instructions to only contact her. "You're making a terrible mistake," he said, voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "Apex Mining has destroyed people with 10 times your resources. You're nobody. A mechanic with 2 kids and no idea what you're doing. We will bury you." "Then try," Marcus said, and hung up. But the pressure increased. Someone filed a complaint with Child Protective Services alleging that Marcus's living conditions were unsafe for children. A social worker named Janet Moore showed up unannounced, inspected the cottage with cold efficiency, interviewed Carter and Riley separately. Marcus stood outside their rooms, heart pounding, terrified they'd say something that could be twisted. After 2 hours, Janet closed her notebook. "I'll file my report. You'll hear from us." "This is retaliation," Marcus said. "You know that, right?" "I don't know anything except what I observe. And what I observe is a single father under extreme stress living in substandard housing with 2 children. That warrants investigation." After she left, Marcus sat on his sagging couch and put his head in his hands. They were coming after his kids, actually trying to take his children because he wouldn't surrender. The rage that filled him was beyond anything he'd ever felt. Father Miguel found him like that an hour later, having heard about the CPS visit through the town gossip network. The priest sat beside him in silence for a long time before speaking. "They want you to break. That's the point of all this. Make you so afraid, so exhausted, so overwhelmed that you give up." "What if they take my kids?" They won't, because you're a good father fighting for his family. The truth still matters, even when it's hard to see. The town rallied in ways Marcus never expected. Maria Santos organized a letter-writing campaign to CPS, getting dozens of Copper Ridge residents to attest to Marcus's character. The school principal wrote a statement describing Carter and Riley as well-adjusted, cared for children. Even Mrs. Castellano, his landlord, submitted a letter explaining that Marcus had always prioritized his children's needs, that any issues with the cottage were building-related, not neglect. Old Man Ritchie did something even more direct. He and 5 other retired miners started taking shifts watching Marcus's house at night. "Nobody's touching those kids," Ritchie said simply. "Not while we're breathing." The preliminary CPS report came back, inconclusive pending further review, which Michelle explained was bureaucrat speak for, "We found nothing, but someone with power is pressuring us to keep looking." Then came the break Marcus desperately needed. A private investigator Michelle had hired, a former cop named Raymond Torres, found something explosive. Apex Mining had known about the Silver Gorge deposit since the late 1940s. They'd done the original surveys, found the rare earth concentrations, and deliberately suppressed the information. They were sitting on it, Raymond explained, spreading documents across Marcus's kitchen table, waiting for extraction technology to improve and prices to rise. They've been doing this across the entire Southwest, buying up rare earth deposits and keeping them dormant to control supply and inflate prices. "That's illegal," Marcus said. "Extremely. It's anti-competitive behavior. Potential antitrust violations. The Federal Trade Commission would be very interested." Michelle made the call. Within a week, FTC investigators were all over Apex. The story exploded nationally. CNN ran a segment. The Wall Street Journal published an investigation. Suddenly, Marcus Webb wasn't just fighting for his mine. He was the face of corporate accountability. Apex's stock price tanked. Trevor Holt was placed on administrative leave, and most importantly, all legal challenges to Marcus's claim were quietly withdrawn. The war wasn't over, but Marcus had won the first major battle. He sat in his cottage with Carter and Riley on either side of him watching the news coverage, and felt something he hadn't felt in months. Not quite relief, not quite peace, but possibility. The possibility that they might actually survive this, that the fight hadn't been for nothing. Carter looked up at him with those 2 old eyes. "Dad, are we going to be okay now?" Marcus pulled both his children close. "Yeah, buddy. I think we finally are." But he knew better than to let his guard down completely, because men like Trevor Holt didn't accept defeat gracefully, and corporations like Apex didn't forget. The fight had simply entered a new phase, one where the stakes were even higher and the consequences more permanent. As November turned to December and construction equipment began arriving at Silver Gorge, as Cascades engineers started surveying for the access road that would change everything, Marcus stood at the original tunnel entrance where this had all begun. He thought about that first day, scared and desperate, with nothing but a flashlight and his grandfather's stories. He thought about every threat, every setback, every moment he'd wanted to quit. And he thought about his children, safe at home with Ritchie and the other retired miners keeping watch. "I didn't quit, Grandpa," Marcus whispered to the wind and the desert and the ghost of old Frank Webb. "They tried to break me and I didn't quit." The desert wind answered with silence. But somehow that was enough. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time since this began, Marcus Webb wasn't fighting alone. And that made all the difference. The Federal Trade Commission's investigation into Apex Mining Corporation concluded on a cold January morning. Marcus was at the Silver Gorge site watching Cascades engineers survey the access road when Michelle called, her voice tight with controlled excitement. "Marcus, you need to see this. The FTC just released their findings." Marcus drove to the small office space Michelle had rented in Copper Ridge, now serving as headquarters for what everyone was calling the web mining project. She had her laptop open, the FTC report displayed on screen. They found evidence of systematic anti-competitive behavior dating back 40 years, Michelle explained. Apex deliberately monopolized rare earth deposits across 7 states, bought claims through shell companies, suppressed geological surveys, and artificially inflated prices by keeping viable mines dormant. It's one of the largest corporate fraud cases in mining history. "What does that mean for us?" Marcus asked, though he already knew his voice steady despite his racing heart. "It means complete vindication. The Justice Department is filing criminal charges against 3 Apex executives, including Trevor Holt. The company is being forced to divest holdings, pay massive fines, and faces potential dissolution. And Marcus, every legal challenge they filed against you has been not just withdrawn, but exposed as part of a pattern of harassment designed to eliminate competition. You're not just in the clear, you're untouchable." Marcus sat down hard in the nearest chair. For months, he'd been fighting with the constant fear that some technicality, some legal maneuver, some corrupt official might steal everything away. Now it was over. Actually, over. They can't come after me anymore? They can't come after anyone anymore. Apex mining as we know it is finished. That evening, Marcus picked up Carter and Riley from school himself, something he'd been doing every day since the threats began. But today felt different. The weight he'd been carrying, the constant vigilance, the fear that had become his companion, it started to lift. Riley chattered about her art project. Carter talked about basketball tryouts. Normal kid stuff. Beautiful, ordinary, normal kid stuff. At home, Marcus made spaghetti and meatballs, the real kind from scratch instead of the boxed mix they'd been surviving on for years. As they sat around the kitchen table in the cottage they'd almost been evicted from, Marcus looked at his children and felt something break open in his chest. "I have some news," he said carefully. "The investigation into the mining company that was causing us trouble, it's finished. They found out those people were breaking the law. We won." Riley's eyes went wide. "Does that mean the bad people can't hurt us anymore?" "That's exactly what it means, baby." Carter, more cautious, asked, "What happens now?" Marcus took a breath. "Now we build. The mine is going to start operations in a few months. We're going to have money, real money, enough to buy a real house, enough for you both to go to college anywhere you want. Enough that you'll never have to worry about whether we can afford new shoes or if the electricity might get shut off." "How much money?" Carter asked, his analytical mind already working. "A lot. More than we'll probably ever need. But, buddy, I want you to understand something. The money doesn't change who we are. We're still us. We're still the same family. We're just not going to struggle anymore." Riley climbed into his lap, something she was getting almost too big for. "Daddy, can we get a dog?" Marcus laughed, surprising himself with how good it felt. "Yeah, baby, we can definitely get a dog." The transformation of Copper Ridge began slowly, then accelerated like water breaking through a dam. Cascade Mining hired its first wave of local workers in February, 30 people for the construction phase, with promises of 120 permanent positions once operations began. Men and women who'd been unemployed for years suddenly had jobs with good wages and benefits. The ripple effects spread immediately. Maria's diner needed to expand to handle lunch crowds. The gas station hired 2 new attendants. Thompson's General Store started stocking items it hadn't carried in a decade because people could suddenly afford them. Marcus watched it happen with a mixture of pride and something like disbelief. He'd bought a worthless mining claim to chase a desperate dream, and somehow that single act was bringing his dying town back to life. But not everyone celebrated. There were still people who resented him, who thought he'd gotten lucky rather than earned it, who couldn't forgive him for succeeding where they'd failed. Tommy Breslin fell into that category. Marcus ran into him at the grocery store in March, both reaching for cereal boxes on the same aisle. Tommy's face flushed when he saw Marcus. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Tommy said, "Congratulations. I guess you proved everyone wrong." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was something. Marcus nodded. "Thanks. For what it's worth, I was a dick to you. At the auction, after, all of it. I thought I was smarter than everyone who stayed in Copper Ridge. Turns out I was just more bitter." Marcus studied him. Tommy looked smaller somehow, diminished by his own jealousy. "We all deal with this place differently. You wanted out. I was too broke to leave. Neither way is wrong. Still, I'm sorry for mocking you, for doubting you. You deserved better." Marcus extended his hand. After a hesitation, Tommy shook it. It wasn't friendship. Would never be friendship. But it was closure. And that mattered. The first production milestone payment arrived in April, $20 million. Marcus sat in Michelle's office staring at the bank transfer confirmation, the number so large it seemed fictional. 20 million, with more coming. Michelle had structured everything through trusts and LLCs, protecting the money, minimizing taxes, ensuring Carter and Riley's futures were absolutely secure. "What do I do with this?" Marcus asked. "Whatever you want. You've earned it." Marcus thought about that for a long time. He'd spent so many years with nothing that having everything felt paralyzing. He could buy a mansion, fancy cars, take lavish vacations. But none of that appealed to him. What he wanted was simpler and somehow more complicated. He wanted to matter. He wanted his good fortune to mean something beyond his own comfort. He started with a new house, but not a mansion. A solid 4-bedroom home on the edge of Copper Ridge with a yard for Riley's dog, a German Shepherd puppy they'd named Scout. Nothing ostentatious, nothing that screamed wealth. Just a real home with working heat and air conditioning and plumbing that didn't groan. Carter got his own room finally, a proper space with new furniture and a desk for homework. Riley got her own room painted purple with clouds on the ceiling, and Marcus got a bedroom instead of a couch, a bed that didn't make his back ache. But he kept working. Not at Patterson's shop, that bridge was thoroughly burned. Instead, he started helping at the mine itself, working with Cascade's operations team, learning about extraction processes and mineral processing. Dr. Gerald Huang became a mentor, teaching Marcus geology and mining engineering in informal sessions that felt more like conversations than lessons. "You have a natural aptitude for this," Gerald told him one afternoon at the mine site. "You think like a miner. It's in your blood." "My grandfather," Marcus said. "More than that, it's you. You see systems, how things connect. That's rare." Dr. Sarah Chen, Cascade's CEO, offered Marcus an official position, community liaison and operations consultant. It came with a salary, an office, and real responsibility. Marcus accepted, surprising himself. He was becoming something he'd never imagined, not just a mine owner, but a mining executive, someone who made decisions that affected dozens of families. The scholarship fund was Marcus's idea. He called it the Frank Webb Memorial Education Trust, named for his grandfather. It would provide full college scholarships for 20 Copper Ridge High School students every year, covering tuition, room, board, and books at any accredited university. The first recipients were announced in May at a ceremony in the old high school gym. Marcus stood at a podium looking out at the gathered families, many of them people who'd mocked him or doubted him or turned away when he was struggling. "My grandfather used to say this town was built on people who weren't afraid of hard work and dark places," Marcus began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "He spent 40 years underground, so his family could have better. I spent most of my adult life just trying to survive, trying to give my kids what they needed. I know what it's like to watch opportunities pass you by because you can't afford them. This scholarship fund exists so that Copper Ridge kids never have to make that choice. If you have the grades and the drive, you have the chance. That's what this community deserves. 20 students were called forward, each receiving a certificate and a check for their first semester. Some cried. Some stood in shocked silence. Parents thanked Marcus with shaking hands and voices thick with emotion. One mother, a woman Marcus vaguely recognized from church, gripped his hand and said, "You gave my daughter a future. How do I thank you for that?" "You don't," Marcus said gently. "You just make sure she uses it." Carter and Riley sat in the front row watching their father give away hundreds of thousands of dollars to other people's children. Later, Carter asked, "Dad, doesn't it bother you, giving all that money to strangers?" "No," Marcus said honestly, "because I remember being desperate. I remember not being able to afford your school supplies or Riley's field trip fees. Money only matters if it does something good. This is good." The town's infrastructure improvements came next. Marcus worked with the county and Cascade to fund repairs to Copper Ridge's water system, which had been failing for years. New pipes were laid. The treatment plant was upgraded. For the first time in a decade, water came out of taps clear instead of rust-colored. The elementary school got new computers, updated textbooks, playground equipment that didn't have broken pieces. The community center, which had been closed since 2008, was renovated and reopened with new programs, after-school care, senior activities, job training courses. "You're rebuilding this town," Father Miguel told Marcus one Sunday after Mass. "I'm just sharing what I got lucky enough to find." It's more than luck, it's character. You could have taken Apex's money and left, could have developed this mine and kept everything for yourself. Instead, you're lifting everyone up. Marcus thought about that. "My kids live here, their friends live here. I don't want them growing up in a ghost town. If I can change that, why wouldn't I?" Angela called in June. Marcus was in his home office reviewing extraction reports when his phone rang with a number he'd deleted but still recognized. He stared at it for 3 rings before answering. "Hello?" "Marcus." Her voice was exactly as he remembered, soft, uncertain, weighted with things unsaid. "I heard about everything. The mine, the money, what you've done for Copper Ridge. I wanted to, I don't know, congratulate you. Say I'm happy for you." "Thank you." Silence stretched between them, awkward and painful. Finally, Angela said, "I know I don't have the right to ask, but could I see Carter and Riley? Maybe for a weekend? I know I left. I know I gave up that right. But they're still my children and I miss them." Marcus closed his eyes. Every bitter part of him wanted to say no, wanted to punish her for abandoning them, for leaving him to struggle alone. But Carter and Riley deserved a mother who wanted them, even if she'd taken 2 years to figure that out. "Let me talk to them. If they want to see you, we'll arrange something. But Angela, if you come back into their lives, you stay. You don't get to be a part-time parent because things are easier now." "I understand, Marcus, I'm sorry, for leaving, for everything." "I know." And he did. He wasn't ready to forgive, might never be fully ready, but he understood. Fear made people run. Love made them stay. She'd chosen fear. He'd chosen love. That was the difference between them. That evening, he sat down with Carter and Riley after dinner. "Your mom called. She wants to see you both. Maybe have you visit for a weekend in Phoenix. How do you feel about that?" Riley's face lit up immediately. "Mommy wants to see us?" Carter was more guarded. "Why now? Why after 2 years?" "I think she needed time to figure herself out. That doesn't excuse what she did, but people are complicated. You don't have to see her if you don't want to. This is your choice." Carter looked at his sister's hopeful face, then back at Marcus. "Will you be okay if we go?" The question broke Marcus's heart and put it back together at the same time. His 10-year-old son was worried about him. "Yeah, buddy, I'll be fine. And I'll be right here when you get back." The visit happened in July. Marcus drove Carter and Riley to Phoenix, met Angela at a neutral restaurant, and watched his children hug a mother they barely remembered. Angela had lost weight, looked older but somehow lighter, like she'd put down something heavy. "Thank you," she said quietly to Marcus as the kids ran ahead to her car. "Take care of them. That's all I ask." "I will. And Marcus, what you did, fighting for that mine, fighting for them, it's incredible. You're a better parent than I ever was." Marcus didn't know how to respond to that, so he just nodded and drove back to Copper Ridge alone, the truck feeling empty without his children's chatter filling it. They came back on Sunday with stories about museums and swimming pools and restaurants, and Marcus listened with a smile that hurt. Angela wanted to be a mother again, and he had to let her try, even though it terrified him. "We missed you, Daddy," Riley said that night as he tucked her in. "I missed you too, baby." "Phoenix is nice, but it's not home. Home is here with you and Scout and my room with the purple walls." Marcus kissed her forehead, his eyes burning. "I love you, Riley Bear. I love you more." By autumn, Silver Gorge Mine was in full operation. The facility was impressive: modern extraction equipment, a processing plant built to the highest environmental standards, infrastructure that would last decades. Marcus stood on a viewing platform with Dr. Chen and Gerald, watching the first shipment of refined rare earth minerals being loaded onto trucks. "This represents $3 million of product," Dr. Chen said. "First of many shipments. Marcus, you've built something extraordinary here." "We built it," Marcus corrected. "I just found the rocks." But he knew it was more than that. He'd fought when fighting seemed impossible. He'd stood up to a corporation that could have crushed him. He'd refused to quit even when quitting would have been easier. And now, standing here watching the fruits of that determination being loaded onto trucks, he felt something he'd never felt before. He felt successful, not rich though he was, not lucky though he'd been. Successful, like he'd earned his place in the world. The quarterly payments began in October, $30 million every 3 months based on extraction targets and market prices. It was more money than Marcus could spend in 10 lifetimes. Michelle helped him structure most of it into trusts and investments. College funds for Carter and Riley were established that would pay for anything they wanted: undergrad, graduate school, medical school, law school, whatever dreams they eventually chased. The Frank Webb Memorial Trust was expanded to include a community development fund that would continue investing in Copper Ridge infrastructure for generations. But Marcus kept his life relatively simple. He drove a nice but not ostentatious truck. He wore jeans and work shirts. He still ate at Maria's diner, though now he left tips that made her cry. He attended every one of Carter's basketball games and Riley's art shows. He walked Scout every evening through neighborhoods that were slowly coming back to life as families moved back to Copper Ridge, chasing the jobs the mine created. He was, for the first time since Angela left, happy. The 1-year anniversary of the auction fell on a Saturday in late September. Marcus woke early, drove out to Silver Gorge, and stood at the original tunnel entrance where everything had started. The entrance was now secured with a proper gate, the interior shored up and safe, preserved as a historical site. A plaque had been mounted beside the entrance, installed by the County Historical Society. Silver Gorge Mine, established 1879, continuously operated until 1976. Reopened in 2023 by Marcus Webb, whose determination and courage exposed corporate fraud and brought prosperity back to Copper Ridge. Marcus read it and felt his throat tighten. A year ago, he'd been a broke mechanic scraping by, mocked for spending $100 on worthless land. Today, he was a mining executive worth hundreds of millions who'd become a symbol of standing up to corporate power. The journey between those 2 points had nearly destroyed him. But it had also remade him into someone stronger, someone who knew what he was capable of when everything was on the line. His phone buzzed, a text from Carter. "Dad, where are you? Riley made pancakes and they're actually good." Marcus smiled and headed back to his truck. Back to his home, his children, his life. The fortune was real. The mine was real. The transformation of Copper Ridge was real. But none of it mattered as much as Carter's basketball games or Riley's purple room or Scout's enthusiastic greeting when he walked through the door. That night, Marcus gathered his children in the living room of their comfortable but not extravagant home. "I want to talk to you both about something important," he began. "About the mine and the money and what it all means." "Are we rich now?" Riley asked with a 7-year-old's directness. "We're secure," Marcus said carefully. "We have enough money that you'll never have to worry about having enough. You can go to any college, pursue any career, live anywhere. The money gives you choices." "But," Carter said, reading his father's tone, "but money isn't the point. It's a tool, not a goal. The point is what you do with your life, who you become, how you treat people. I want you both to remember where we came from. I want you to remember what it felt like to wear shoes that didn't fit because we couldn't afford new ones, to eat Hamburger Helper 3 nights a week, to worry about whether the electricity would get shut off." "Why?" Riley asked. "That sounds sad." "Because it makes you grateful. And because it reminds you that not everyone is as lucky as we got. Your job, both of you, is to use what we have to make things better. For yourselves, yes, but also for other people. That's what wealth is for, understand?" Carter nodded slowly, "Like the scholarships you made." "Exactly like that. The money isn't to make us fancy or important. It's to give us freedom to be generous, to help people, to matter in ways that last longer than we do." Riley climbed into his lap. "Daddy, you're already important. You're my dad." Marcus held her close, overwhelmed by how simple and profound that truth was. He'd fought for fortune, but what he'd really fought for was sitting right here. The ability to be present for his children, to give them not just things, but time, attention, love, security, the freedom to dream without fear holding them back. That was what $250 million in rare earth minerals actually meant. It meant he could be the father they deserved. As October became November and the first anniversary of the eviction notice passed unmarked, Marcus started teaching Carter and Riley about money management and investment and charitable giving. Not because he wanted them to become financiers, but because he wanted them to understand that wealth was a responsibility, not just a privilege. They established their own charitable fund, Riley's Fund for Art in Schools, with money set aside for them to direct as they got older. Carter started volunteering at the community center, helping younger kids with homework. Riley donated her old toys and clothes to families that needed them. "You're raising good humans," Father Miguel told Marcus one Sunday. "In a world that often uses money to measure worth, you're teaching them to measure worth in kindness. That's rare." Marcus thought about his own father, who died when Marcus was 16. A quiet man who'd worked construction and never made much, but had taught Marcus about integrity, about keeping your word, about being someone people could count on. "I'm just trying to pass on what my dad taught me, with better financial circumstances." Christmas that year was different. Marcus could afford the elaborate gifts, the expensive toys, the latest electronics. Instead, he and Carter and Riley volunteered at the Copper Ridge Food Bank on Christmas Eve, distributing meals to families struggling the way they'd struggled. Riley helped pack boxes. Carter carried them to cars. Marcus worked the distribution line, meeting the eyes of people who were where he'd been just 14 months ago, seeing the shame they felt at needing help, the gratitude mixed with humiliation. "Merry Christmas," he told each person. "We've all needed help at some point. No shame in that." On Christmas morning, Carter and Riley opened modest gifts. New books, art supplies, basketball shoes Carter needed anyway. Under the tree was also an envelope for each of them. Inside were letters Marcus had written explaining that in their names he'd established college scholarships for 2 students, made donations to the animal shelter, funded repairs to the community pool, and invested in a program to provide free school meals to every Copper Ridge student regardless of income. "Your real gifts are these," Marcus told them. "The gift of making someone else's life better. The gift of using what we have to lift others up. That's what Christmas means in this family now." Riley hugged him tight. "This is the best Christmas ever, Daddy." And Marcus, holding his children in their warm home with Scout asleep by the tree and the security of knowing they'd never be evicted or hungry or desperate again, agreed. It was the best Christmas ever, because they'd survived the worst and come out not just wealthy but whole. January brought the final legal resolution. Apex Mining Corporation officially dissolved, its assets sold off to pay fines and settlements. Trevor Holt pled guilty to fraud and conspiracy charges, received a prison sentence of 6 years. The story became a business school case study in corporate corruption and the importance of ethical behavior. Marcus was interviewed by national news outlets, his story held up as an example of courage in the face of institutional power. But Marcus deflected most of the attention. "I'm not a hero," he told one persistent journalist. "I'm just a father who refused to let his kids down. Anyone would have done the same." "But not everyone did," the journalist countered. "That's what makes it remarkable." Maybe. Or maybe Marcus had just been desperate enough and stubborn enough and lucky enough to pull it off. The combination of those 3 things, desperation and stubbornness and luck, had transformed his life and the life of everyone in Copper Ridge. As spring approached and the mine celebrated its first full year of operations, as Copper Ridge continued its slow revival from ghost town to functional community, as Carter prepared for middle school and Riley started talking about becoming an artist, Marcus found himself thinking about legacy. What would people remember about Marcus Webb 50 years from now? The money would be gone, spent on scholarships and community improvements and the comfortable lives of his descendants. The mine would eventually play out, rare earth minerals exhausted. But maybe, just maybe, people would remember that a broke mechanic from a dying town had stood up to corporate power and won, had used his fortune to lift others up instead of just enriching himself, had taught his children that wealth was measured not in what you kept but in what you gave away. That was a legacy worth leaving. One Saturday, in early March, exactly 16 months after that auction that changed everything, Marcus took Carter and Riley back to Silver Gorge. They stood at the entrance to the original tunnel, now preserved and safe, and Marcus told them the whole story, every detail, the $100 he couldn't afford to spend, the mockery and doubt, the fear and threats, the moment he'd found the cavern and realized what he was looking at, the decision to fight instead of surrender. "Why are you telling us this?" Carter asked. "Because someday you'll face something hard, something that seems impossible, and I want you to remember that your dad faced impossible and won, not because I was special, but because I refused to quit. That's the real treasure I found out here, not the minerals, the knowledge that I was strong enough to stand when everything pushed me to fall." Riley took his hand. "I think you're special, Daddy." Marcus knelt down so he was eye level with both his children. "You're both going to do amazing things. You're going to have opportunities I never dreamed of. College, careers, lives without the fear and struggle I grew up with. But when things get hard, because life gets hard for everyone, I want you to remember this place. Remember that impossible things become possible when you don't give up. Promise me you'll remember that." "We promise," they said together. Marcus stood, looked one last time at the tunnel entrance where his impossible journey had begun, and led his children back to the truck. Back to Copper Ridge, the town that had mocked him and then celebrated him and now just accepted him as part of its fabric. Back to the life he'd fought so hard to build. Because anyone can find fortune if they're lucky, but it takes character to turn fortune into legacy. Marcus Webb had done both, and that story, That legacy of one man's refusal to accept defeat would echo through Copper Ridge for generations. Not because of the money, but because of what the fight had proven, that sometimes the most worthless things contain the greatest value, and sometimes the most ordinary people are capable of extraordinary courage. All they need is a reason to fight and the refusal to surrender. Marcus had found both in a forgotten mining shaft and a father's desperate love. And in finding them, he'd transformed not just his life, but an entire community's future. The end. Up next, two more powerful stories of courage, transformation, and refusing to quit when life demands it. Click now to continue the journey with us. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when they fight for what matters most.